Now shift gears in our readings. We're back to the Gospel of Mark. We're in the beginning of Jesus's ministry, and we're now starting to face some serious opposition. Jesus went home, and the crowd came together again so that they could not even eat. When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, "He has gone out of his mind." The scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebul. By the ruler of the demons, he cast out demons." He called them to him and spoke to them in parables. "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. Even if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end is come. No one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong one. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, is guilty of an eternal sin, because they had said, 'He has an unclean spirit.' Then his mother and his brothers came. Standing outside, they sent for him and called him. A crowd was sitting around, and they said, 'Your mother, your brothers, your sisters are outside asking for you.' He replied, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' Looking at those who sat around him, he said, 'Here are my mother, here are my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother, my sister, and my mother.'" The reading ends here. This morning I'm really seizing on a few brief words from the reading from 2 Corinthians. The word I'm seizing on this morning is renewal. I need to hear this personally for a few reasons. I'm off for a time of what I hope will be some renewal at Yale this week. But also I went to a Committee on Ministry subcommittee meeting for the Illinois side of our presbytery. Every bit of news was rotten and depressing and made me downcast for quite a while. So I need to hear this as well as anyone else. I was struggling with this sermon earlier, and so I decided to look up Paul's word or phrase, inner renewal, on that magical device, Google. And the numbers came roaring back, you know how helpful it is, 8,542 hits or whatever. And for inner renewal, the number one set of messages were for massage. I won't go into what sort. The next most popular set of responses were different new styles of therapy, especially therapy that links up Eastern religious practices from India and the Orient and us. And the third most popular one that in this case promised inner renewal was, of course, the memory foam mattress. Fourth was homeopathic treatment that again promised to renew, quote, youthful vigor for those who complain about no energy, but then I thought, but rarely seem to show any interest in pursuing anything that takes much vigor. Homeopathy, of course, is the quack idea from Europe that well, none of you drink, but you've heard people say, when you've drank too much, I'll have a little bit of the dog that bit me in the morning. That's homeopathy. You try to replicate the symptom you have, and that will restore your body to balance. Okay. Notice none of them talked about matters of the spirit, but homeopathy, mattresses, therapy, and massage. When I took Greek in seminary, I was frustrated that I could read the Gospels somewhat, especially Mark and John, but could not read Paul. I needed a dictionary right in front of me all the time. And this was one of the reasons. When you look at the word renewal or renewing, he apparently invented the word. It doesn't appear in any Greek document prior to Paul. And what he's doing in this piece is drawing a sharp distinction between our outer nature, or what we really would call our physical appearance, and what he terms inner renewal. He wants us to go beyond mere appearance, and indeed go beyond the physical. And he says every day we're renewed, we're given new life inwardly, internally. I think he's trying to say that every day we wake up, we experience new Easter life, even in the face of death. Every day we are being renewed, maybe not physically, maybe not even mentally, but in the heart of who we are. God is working to establish us as new people, worthy of the gift of salvation. With that promise of inner renewal, he says that we are capable of fighting through what we struggle with in this earth. So he says we do not lose heart. And that is the root of our word, even in English, courage. But we do not lose heart. And I want to be very careful here. Later in the passage, when he's trying to draw these two comparisons, he says, we go through this life with a slight momentary affliction. Anybody who suffers knows that affliction never is slight. Part of me thinks he's being sarcastic because we downplay the suffering of others and we overplay our own. But earlier in this passage, he gives a terrible catalog of troubles that every human being faces. Mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and yes, physically. But it's been said, being able to speak a word of hope in the midst of affliction is itself a critique of how we look at our troubles. The Spirit works within us and defines affliction and success or perfection. And that Spirit of God works in and through what Paul calls clay jars, or we used to call earthen vessels, vulnerable, broken, but capable of holding treasures. And as we grow older, this idea of inner renewal are good words for us to hear again as we age. Outwardly, some perfect person of 20 looks at us and thinks we're wasting away. I, as a baby boomer, was raised with the great truth: don't trust anyone don't trust anyone over 30. The Who memorably said, and now in their age, they are still on the road, Hope I die before I get old. Neil Young, even old, said it's better to burn out than it is to rust. We assume age means wasting away. But Paul says, don't look at appearances. Set appearances aside. Our eyes can be set on something grand. Part of that vision is heaven, a place where resurrection will renew us together with God. But that transports to this world too. What does daily renewal look and feel like? Part of it, I think, is being able to let go, maybe even bury the past that continues to afflict us or burden us or weigh us down. Part of it is, as I indicated, having the courage to get up to face a new day and not giving up to despair. Or as we heard in Bible study this morning, being able to hold on to hope even in the face of experience. I've often said that a sign of acute depression is when it takes an act of real courage to merely get out of bed in the morning. Paul's not offering a health and wealth gospel here. Paul's admitting the whole weight of afflictions that seem to stand in opposition to this vision of glory he has. Paul's not being here those annoying people when you ask them how they're doing, they answer, blessed. No. In the face of life's turmoil, we can find the courage to hope. Paul says that the inner renewal that God gives us every day is preparing us for heaven, preparing us for a destiny that reflects that we are made not to be afflicted, not to be disrespected. No, we are being made in the image of God. That inner renewal is constantly forming us into who we've always been meant to be, made in the image and likeness of God in this world and in the next. Years and years and years ago, I took biology in high school, and occasionally I'll run across something that makes my eyebrows raise in that area that's beyond my usual look at cholesterol numbers, cancer procedures, and the like. And that's cellular regeneration. I don't think I learned this in high school, but cellular regeneration occurs for all of us all our lives, no matter how old we are. Now, when we get old, that slows down too. But we are entirely new beings every 7 years. There's not a single cell in our body that's older than 7 years. Skin, stomach, brain, we're constantly being physically renewed. Now, I am aware that as we age, they have this wonderful phrase, cellular senescence, but they're asleep. They're slow to change, but change they do. But even though we're frail, flower pots, Paul calls us, we possess a treasure. And notice he calls us temples. Take a moment there. When Paul wrote this letter, the temple was still standing. For Jews, the temple was the axis mundi, the center of the universe. It was the point of contact between God and humanity. Paul, with the temple standing, calls our lives, these bodies, this collection of cells and memories, tabernacles, temples, dwelling places for God. We sure might not look, well, you do. I sure might not look like much. But Paul's saying, even that, even this possesses treasures. In Paul's time, earthen vessels did grow things. They held the precious ointment. They held the desperately needed water. They held the olive oil. They held grain. The whole base of the economy held in earthen vessels. When I go to Yale this week, there's a good chance we're going to get to see a fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were held often in earthen vessels, spiritual treasures in ordinary jars. All of us possess treasures, the treasure of life itself. And since we're in church, we all possess spiritual treasures beyond any appearance. They are gifts given us from a generous God. Some of those gifts that we put so much stock on are merely transient, Paul says. But we look toward long-term thinking, he says, the eternal, permanent presence of God in our life. Yes, suffering makes time go achingly slowly as math class in 6th grade. But he reminds us that a whole new world awaits us. In a new world, in a new dimension that we call heaven. But that new world is constantly being born in us every day we get out of bed. Lately, we've been emphasizing a force of character called resilience, being able to bounce back. I remember my mother saying that that was the virtue in her life she saw fading away as she aged, that it was getting harder and harder to bounce back from bad news, another diagnosis, just the limitations of life. But I think resilience, the capacity to bounce back, tells us that no matter our age or condition, life does or can begin anew. We may burn out, but God does not. We may not be able to reboot our thought processes or our emotions, but God can, God does. For God is the God not only of the living, but the new. Now notice, I'm not using the word revival here, I'm using the word renewal, because it's a gift from beyond ourselves. Trying to renew, trying to revive just tires us out. I think it distracts us from what's important, and it discourages us when we fail. We are eternal beings, but we've lost sight of living in eternity. We spend and should time and energy and money on our physical needs and our appearance, but we neglect our eternal souls. And our misplaced efforts and energies leave us feeling exhausted and powerless and detached from God. That's not how God intends us to be, made in the image and likeness of God. We're made to be in relationship with God and each other in ways that are dynamic and whole and fresh every day. Paul is very careful when he's talking about this disjunction of life and death. There's a spiritual renewal group called Renovare. And drawing from Paul, they use a remarkable phrase. In ancient times, death was seen less as the grim reaper, the harvester of our imagination, and more as a ravening beast who opened up its mouth and grabbed us in. Paul uses a different phrase, that it's not death that swallows us up, but life. What a remarkable spiritual image to hold on to for this week. Death does not swallow us up, Paul says, but life. All we have to do then is accept it, embrace it, and live within what it has to offer.